So, kicking off our second session, we have Allison Cardona. And Allison joined the University of California, Davis Correct Shelter Medicine Program in January 2022 as California State Director. She manages the $37.5 million California All for Animals grant program. I'm assuming that's US dollars. So that's more money than we can even think about in Australian dollars. It's funded by the state to help animal shelters reduce the euthanasia of healthy and treatable animals. Prior to this, Allison worked for nearly 5 years as Deputy Director for the LA County Department of Animal Care and Control. In that role, she oversaw 3 full-service animal care centres, a communications centre, public relations, adoption partners, behaviour and enrichment, and volunteer programs. They work you guys hard in the US, don't they? Allison also served as liaison to the county's homeless initiative, ensuring that people experiencing homelessness have options and resources for their pets. She also participated in the county's anti-racism, diversity and inclusion initiative, assisting with the implementation of an anti-racist policy agenda. Before moving to LA, Allison spent 14 years as a senior program director at the ASPCA in a variety of departments, including adoptions, spay-neuter, disaster response, large-scale cruelty operations, animal hoarding cases, cruelty intervention programs, and community engagement. Allison received a bachelor's degree in public affairs from the Empire State College in New York and is a graduate of the USC Price School of Public Policy Executive Leadership Development Program and Southern Utah University Certificate in Executive Animal Services. So, Allison Cardona, welcome to the stage to present Increasing Positive Outcomes, Partnering with Communities to Send More Animals Home.
So much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And I just really appreciate the thoughtfulness and intentionality of this summit and conference and everything that's gone into the planning, and really applaud the organizers. So thank you. And listening to this morning's sessions, I already feel, even though I'm so far away from home, I live in Los Angeles, that the world is quite small because a lot of the same things that you're dealing with and that it sounds like within your animal welfare and management is really quite simple, quite similar, and maybe some of the details are different, but the feeling and a lot of the root causes, it sounds like, are pretty similar. So it makes the world feel a little smaller. So today I'm going to talk about increasing positive outcomes, and this is something that we've been talking about a lot in the US. And I did a quick little dive into some of your own statistics here in Australia, and once again found a lot of similarities. So I'm just going to offer some tools and some approaches that we've used in the US that we found to be effective and could be compelling. So I'll share that with you today. I wanted to share a little bit about my background because I think Mike opened us up so beautifully this morning. Thank you. Talking about his own experience and vulnerability. And we're all people, and as a whole human, I bring my whole self to this work. And so I wanted to share some of my identities because it's also informed my path and the way that I do this work. You heard a little bit about my professional background. I also identify as queer. My pronouns are she and her. I am the daughter of Colombian immigrants. They both immigrated to the United States from Colombia. I am a first-generation Latina. I'm also a Spanish speaker in addition to speaking English. And I volunteer with organizations that are very passionate to my heart, involving people experiencing homelessness and women's issues in the US. I also say this because as I'm going to be talking about maybe some barriers that exist and that some that could be removed, I also have to tell you how I came to this work and the way that I entered. And it was about 20 years ago in New York City. And I have to say that it first really entered through rescue groups. And you'll understand more as I talk about some of these barriers, but I put all of these barriers in place. I remember when I was first doing rescue and I was adopting out kittens, no one was good enough. I had a very lengthy application. I interviewed people. I was actually, at the time, I had been working for an architecture firm, and one of the partners wanted to adopt 2 kittens that I was fostering. And so I interviewed him, I screened him, and he lived in a mansion in a wealthy suburb outside of New York City, and he had a family, and I believe he even had housekeeping help. And I denied him. I said that he could not adopt those kittens. I said absolutely not, because he talked about maybe letting them outside at some point. And so the kittens stayed in my house a bit longer. I think I ended up adopting them out to a couple who lived in a tiny, tiny apartment, a studio apartment in New York City, but they weren't going to let them out. And I felt that that was the better option. Needless to say, that partner no longer spoke to me after that, and I didn't have much of a career in architecture after telling him he couldn't have those kittens. So I took a look at some of your statistics here, and thank you to Nell for providing this report and the sources Pets in Australia, and learned that very similar to the US, about 69% of Australian households have pets. You probably knew this already. Probably many of you, if not all, have pets. And what I always find interesting too is how much people spend on their pets. And here in Australia, and this is Australian dollars, you all spend about $33 billion annually on your pets. So that's supplies, pet food, clothes, leashes, vet care, all of the above. And as I said, the stats in the US are pretty much the same. The only thing is that it's a little higher in terms of what we spend, but that's just because we have a bigger population. So people love their pets. And the other thing is that they're getting them. That's the other thing we're taking a look at, is where do people get pets here? And also, surprisingly, it's very similar to the US as well. About a third of people get pets from shelters or rescue groups. And something that you all do differently here in the way you broke out your data was that you talk about mixed breeds, and then I think it was designer, I can't remember the 3 categories, but there were 3 categories. But I looked at the mixed breeds, which is very similar to the US. And so about a third most folks get pets from friends, families, or neighbors. And if you think about maybe the first time you got a pet, I know the first time I got a pet, a friend of ours, a family friend, their cat had a litter of kittens, and I went over there and picked out, I think I was 3 years old, and I picked out one of the kittens, and we brought her home. And you'll see here, too, that not a lot of folks actually get them from pet shops. Some get them from breeders, more so with dogs than with cats. Some have adopted strays, and very few get them from vets. And an interesting note from this data set as well is that about a third of folks obtained their dogs for free. So the next point that I thought was really interesting was they asked respondents, do you plan to get a pet in the next 12 months? Are you actively interested, actively looking to get a pet? And this was really interesting because you can see, and hopefully you can see the numbers, they're not too small, but there are about 6.9 million pet owners. And of those, about 3 million are actively thinking about getting a new pet. It doesn't say from where, it just says that they're actively thinking about that. And then there's a whole other group, another 3 million, that's interested but not considering. So there's still, there's the possibility there. And then this whole group of non-pet owners that are also interested, maybe not considering, but you have about 500,000 who are actively considering a pet. So if we think back to this graph, we have a lot of competition. Folks are not, 1 out of 3 of those folks currently will be coming to us, to animal shelters and rescue groups for pets, and the rest will be looking to their families or friends or people that they trust. So what I see here, which I think is exciting, and this is also very similar in the US, is there's a lot of opportunity. There's an opportunity for us to look at what's going on within our shelters and within our organizations and see how we can possibly change, especially given the COVID pandemic and everything that we've learned in the past couple of years. And again, this idea that we're actually a lot smaller and more interconnected than we think. So what does this mean? So this is data that I was not able to find that comparable in Australia, but I can share with you what's going on in the US. Over the past couple of years, intake has gone up to animal shelters, and what we're also seeing is that outcomes have gone down. So adoptions, foster, transferred organizations has stayed pretty stagnant, and we're seeing a longer length of stay in our animal shelters. So animals are staying there longer, and they're not getting the same outcomes that they were having pre-pandemic. And there's a group in the US called the Animal Shelters Count, where a lot of organizations submit their data. The estimate that there are about 10% of animals entering shelters that will not have an outcome by the end of the year. And what we're seeing is a lot of organizations that are over their capacity, a lot of illness, and importantly, a lot of really, really stressed out shelter workers, animal management, folks and organizations in general. And a little bit of the narrative too that's happening is that people don't want to adopt or that there isn't enough promotion about adoption. I'm guessing that you have similar information out there. I actually, yesterday I took a lovely kayaking tour, and I asked the guide if he had any pets, and right away he enthusiastically said, I have 2 rescued dogs. So like, oh, the language is there. This concept of finding a home for a pet that needs one is definitely here as well. And I know in the US, we've really put it out there of adopt, don't shop. There's hashtags, there's, who rescued who. There's really a messaging and a language around adopting. So why aren't they the top choice? Why aren't we seeing 100% of people, or at least higher than 30% of people going to shelters to adopt or to get their pet? And this is when we have to take a really hard look at ourselves. Because if we're looking at outside situations, and yes, cost of living is going up, there's economic hardship, it's harder to keep our pets. However, people still have pets. That's what we're seeing. That continues, and the acquiring of pets continues, but they just aren't coming to us. So what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is talk about some of the barriers that may exist. You may reflect on this yourselves. You might see some of your own organizations. I just invite you to be open to the possibilities. A lot of times I'll speak to organizations in the work we do with grants, and they're like, we don't have any barriers. It is super easy to come and adopt from us. And I'm like, okay, great. Let me just take a peek at your website. Let me just see what's going on. And in a matter of seconds, you can see maybe it's only in one language. Maybe it's really hard to find the application. Maybe the application is really long and it's really techy. So there's often a lot of barriers that exist that sometimes it helps just having someone from the outside take a look at. So I'm going to talk about 3. Cost, the application process, and then communications, and break down each one. So you heard me say in the stats that about 28% of folks who acquired dogs from that survey got them for free. I don't know if this happens here, but in the US a lot, there is, and Mike talked about it this morning, there's still some hesitation in doing either lowered fee adoptions or no fee at all. There's definitely a lot of organizations that will state that if a person doesn't pay for their pet, then they won't value them. So for myself, I know this not to be true because, as I mentioned, my first cat we got from free with a lot of love from our neighbors, and we kept her for 17 years. But there's also studies. So I believe it was the ASPCA, actually, that did a study. And really debunked this idea that adopters don't value free pets. And I can add it to the Whova app so you all can see it. And it showed that there really was no correlation between the amount of money someone paid for their pet and the level of attachment that they have to them. And anyone here who has gotten a pet through a friend or working in animal shelters, a lot of time we get discounts. The last time, I actually paid full price for my last 2 dogs. But I think the time before that, there was no adoption fee at all. So we usually get the inside track anyway. So why we want to talk about this as well is that the cost of adoption may be a barrier. I heard in some of the earlier talks about people having very limited resources, maybe $50 left for a crisis. So, and I also heard such a beautiful thing about that we can't afford not to have people have pets because of the love and the companionship and really the overall health benefits that pets bring. So how someone acquires their pet and what they pay for it really shouldn't be a factor, and can really be a barrier to what people have available today. They might have all of their resources accounted for the month and not able to actually pay that $100, $200, and sometimes much more on that very day. I did want to mention that I worked for Los Angeles County Animal Control in California, and there were times where we did waive all fees, and it was free adoptions, and we saw things be stagnant. And so we took a look at that, a deeper dive, and what we actually found is that much like, I don't know if that happens here, but in the US there's sales and there's, department stores are doing this. So doing promotions actually helped. So if one month it was $20, the next month it was $5, if there was some type of catchy promotion with it, that actually tended to increase adoptions more so than necessarily just keeping them always at zero. Just a factor there. Something we get a lot, especially with municipal shelters in the US, is saying that the adoption fees are revenue. And especially with nonprofit organizations or rescue groups saying, how will we be able to survive if we're not charging these adoption fees? And this is a study that was done with the University of Denver, and they took a look at Austin Pets Alive and their average cost of care versus their adoption fee. And they were charging $160 on average for adoptions for cats and dogs. And so what they looked at was their total cost of care per day and then the length of stay of the animals in their care. And really, they would basically break even or might even make $56 if the animal was adopted within 2 days, which is lovely, would be great if all animals could be adopted within 2 days. But I know at my last shelter, in Los Angeles County, our average length of stay was more in the 20 days, and that was average. So basically anything after 2 days, we were operating at a loss, and we were actually just starting to incur charges. So beyond the quality of life for the animal, having an animal stay in your shelter, just thinking about it from a cost perspective, this is a compelling argument to bring to any municipality or government leaders that might be hesitant. And this was something at LA County that they said, you have to bring in revenue. And we kept emphasizing that it's actually not at all. And it would be better for us to get the animals out sooner. So, and happy to share this study as well because it's pretty compelling. So that's cost. Application process. I'm sharing with you some examples from the US. I did happen to take a little peek at some of the members and some of the organizations here, and I can say that there's a lot of opportunity, which, no shade to anyone, no judgment, just like me denying, thinking, really coming from a place of having the animal's best intention in mind and thinking that if there's a lengthy application process, we can somehow guarantee that it's going to stay in that home and nothing bad will happen to it, which is not true. It's not the case. So application processes, lengthy ones, multiple pages, multiple questions. I call these some of the essay-style questions that are kind of like got you, like how would you discipline your animal? What would you do if you had to give it up? I've seen lengthy things about, do you have a pool? Are you going to smoke in your house? I'm not sure why that's relevant, but I've definitely seen those on US applications. And then also very intimate questions about people's income. In the US, oftentimes people have to show their mortgage statement for home ownership, private details, very intrusive, that actually people don't have to do when they go to a breeder or to a pet shop or adopt from a friend or neighbor. Also, there's a habit of checking people's social media, I guess to see, I'm not sure if they'll post about the animal or maybe, there's some kind of political concern that you might have, and lots of prejudice and discrimination. And I'll share with you in a minute some of the process that we did at LA County to remove that, and that we had to really do a lot of reflection on our own bias that was coming up. So these are from US organizations, but some examples that I'll read here. And this was quotes from different organizations. Staff will go through the applications and call back the ones that seem the best match. And I like to point to data here too. This can bring up, and I'll share this, there was a study done by University of California at Berkeley about hiring practices, and that when there are names that oftentimes there's implicit bias that comes up. And so in the study, they saw what they did was put 2 resumes, or 2 CVs, as you call them, with the exact same qualifications. They put one with a white-sounding name, and they put one with a black-sounding name or an ethnic name. And each time, the white-sounding name was chosen, and the one person with the black-sounding name or ethnic name was completely ignored, even though the experience was the same. So this happens. We do it unconsciously. So this idea of going through the applications and getting a feeling about what might be the best match is just an opportunity. It really opens a door for bias that we just don't need. So just going through that idea. This is another one. Never had any animal control or animal management violations, cruelty convictions, or broken any adoption contracts in the past. So I'm guessing that means that if you return your animal, you're no longer allowed to adopt. Or an animal control violation could include an off-leash. So if you've gotten a ticket, I guess you're not also allowed to adopt. And then this other one, which is you have to agree to a possible future home inspection if you adopt one of their large breed dogs. I don't know about you, but I generally hide when someone comes to the door unless I know I'm getting a package or something else. I'm like, I don't want what you're selling. I don't want to hear about whatever it is you have to offer. So that's an interesting one as well. And then the last section is on communications. And this one, we definitely in the US are very guilty of. And in California, we actually about, I think it's a split. It's about 50% of our population are Latinos, Latinx community. There's many Spanish speakers. There's also a number of other, I think there's 10, the top 10 languages. And most shelters and organizations in California do not have any information other than in English. There's also a lot of industry jargon. I know I'm guilty of that, of using acronyms or things that people are like, I don't know what you're talking about, what that means. Or they might not even say that. They might just kind of shrink away because they feel silly or feel like they're not in the know. Even the idea of, so in the US we say spay-neuter, here you say desexed. I had no idea what spay-neuter was before I started working in animal welfare. And then a vague process. It's kind of a lot of just come here and bring an ID, but it's not clear what will happen once you get there and what the steps are. And then a lot of assumptions. I get this, I'll just share on a personal level a lot, where I think people assume that I am maybe not Latina, and so they say a lot of things, negative things about Hispanic populations and Latino populations in front of me, which is interesting to see that perspective, but there's a lot of assumptions about what my community in particular in California thinks about their pets. So I went over those 3 potential barriers, and just wanted to think for yourself, just take a moment, just take 30 seconds to just reflect. And if you see yourselves or your organizations in any of these barriers, And you all have notes there if you want to jot down maybe any of these that have potential to be lowered at your shelter or maybe an organization you work with. So just take a minute for that. Lovely. Okay. So for the remaining time, I'll talk a little bit about what animal sheltering and adoptions looks like with fewer barriers. And hopefully either if you're doing all of these things, amazing. And actually, if you are doing all of these things, please come up afterwards or raise your hand and we'd be happy to share an Association of Shelter Veterinarian guidelines with you because this is, I think pretty groundbreaking. So we're going to talk about simplifying your adoption process, partnering with the community, and then mitigating bias. And I say mitigating bias because bias exists. It exists in all of us. It's either unconscious or conscious, and it's something to become aware of and to not let creep into policies. Okay, so simplifying adoption. This, like I said, regularly reviewing your programs and policies, it's something we had to do continuously at LA County because things can pop up. And I think the other reason is that, and I'm imagining probably that folks do this here as well, if something negative happens, then it's like, uh-oh, we got to button everything up. Okay, no, that one thing happened that one time, so now we are no longer adopting to college students. We're no longer doing this, right? And then we don't think about the other 1,000 times that nothing happened. So especially in government, at least in the US, we love to do that, the one-off. Reducing length of application. We've been working with some shelters in the US, and some of them were like, I don't even know why we're asking all these questions. And something that's kind of interesting could be for you to try to take the application yourself and think about if you or any of your family members would have passed at any point in their life. So I know for myself, I've been denied adoptions. There was one time I tried to adopt a puppy and the rescue group told me that I worked too much and I would be away from home too long for more than 8 hours a day, so I wasn't allowed to adopt the puppy. I'm not as familiar with your housing policies and housing related questions, but from what I saw, it sounds like, and what I heard this morning, it's hard. Sometimes people, it sounds like, hide their pets because they're not allowed to have them in certain types of housing. But what we found is that people are getting their pets, right? And if they're not getting them from us, they might not be desexed, vaccinated, microchipped. The basic thing that I keep coming back to is that people will get pets, and we want them to get them from us. And so simplifying any vague, unclear language, just being very upfront about what you mean. Here are the steps. You will come and meet with us. You will come and see the animals. You will fill out a form. Just being clear and provide things in different ways, verbally, writing, follow up with people afterwards, conversationally. It can really go a long way. But I feel like this is also sort of a low-hanging fruit that you can really simplify and take away a lot of barriers in just your adoption process. And partnering with the community, really get to know your communities in a way that isn't like, I know what you need and I know what your experience is like, but more so, what's going on? What do you need? What is it like? What are your pets like? What are the pets that you've had in your life like? Just getting to know people and learn about I loved hearing earlier about the Desexing Project and understanding what was going on in the different types of social housing and understanding what is actually pet inclusive and where people can have pets. And always suggest learning what languages are prominent and finding out, just a note here too, to really, I would say for casual conversations, some type of Google Translate is fine, but if you're doing anything written, would really, really suggest that you partner with someone who's native or an official translator, because it's not just about the language, it's also about the context. And I can say from being a Spanish speaker, When direct translation is used, a lot of the time it's gibberish, or it completely misses the meaning. We used one for our university, and it translated to, we were trying to say return to home, and it translated to find a new home for your pet, which was definitely not our intention. So yeah, just a note there. And these are some examples. There's some great resources that already exist. You also don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah, so definitely partner with your community. This is, yes, I was talking about mitigating bias, and I think just about creating a welcome environment, and not just a welcome environment for the most dominant community or in your shelter or your organization, but really finding out what makes people feel welcomed. Later this afternoon, I'll be talking about cultural responsiveness, and we'll dive into this a bit more. But also making sure that your staff and volunteers and community know and understand that you have a goal of finding homes for pets, and that it's not about screening, it's not about excluding people, it's really about starting from a place of yes. And something that I will say, and we definitely saw this in LA County, we switched from doing a very interview style for certain breeds, and there was definitely a pass-fail, and there was a sort of right or wrong way, and we switched to open conversational adoptions. And it was interesting to see that after a period of time, some of it was turning into screening, where it's like, I don't think this is the right fit for you, but not based on what the person was telling them, but more, I just didn't have a good feeling about this situation, I was a little confused. Yes, so just thinking about that and bouncing it off other people to even say, is this just me? I think I'm having a reaction to this person, and maybe somebody else could take over at this time. And really integrating diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging into your policies and practices, because that's where it can really creep up, and it can be really detrimental to the animals in your care if they're not going home and they're staying in your shelter. This is US information, but we've just started to do a lot more qualitative studies and information to really find out, because in the US, a lot of Black, Indigenous, and people of color are not adopting from shelters in particular. So we did a survey, or actually, sorry, a HABRI. This group did a survey sponsored by Petco Love, and really found out that 68% of Black and Latinx survey respondents said they didn't feel welcome at animal shelters and had negative experiences. So there really was a feeling of exclusion, and so there's really been a movement in the US to try to be more inclusive and partner with communities. And this, I'm going to give you some examples. These are US examples, but I think they're worth looking into, and I can share all of these links on the Whova app. This was a great one. It's called Seymour Mutt's, Simpsons reference there, Seymour Mutt's Rescue. We believe in lowering the barriers to adoption, and because of this, we do not require a minimum adoption fee. We do, however, rely on financial contributions. Any funds received is at the discretion of the adopter and goes towards the care of animals in our rescue. And they have a very, very simple application process. It's that one page, and you can ask for additional information. This is another one that I think is great. It's Montgomery County, Maryland Animal Services. It's a municipal shelter. And right there, they have it in their most prominent languages, Spanish. They also have it in Chinese. And you can get a PDF version. You can right there fill out the application in other languages. I have to give them a shout out because they also did a beautiful translation in Spanish. It's very friendly. And I look at it and I'm like, oh, they really like people who look like me and my community are seen here. And this is a little bit more. I think that's that same group. I just really love how simple and friendly it is. And this is some examples of, and even to say in Los Angeles County, which, you know, Spanish is definitely the second language, and I think it's about 52% Latinx. It wasn't until about a year or two ago that we started translating our promotional materials into Spanish. So there's always opportunity to grow and learn. Okay, I think we only have like a minute or so, but if you'll take a minute and just talk to the person next to you and just say what has inspired you during this talk. during this morning? And is there anything here that you'd like to explore? So just take 1 minute to do that, and then we'll come back. Wonderful. Thank you all. It's so great to hear everyone having so much discussion. I know. Oh, that was the wrap up? Okay. Thank you all for participating in that. And it's so wonderful to hear everyone's voices and communicating with one another. I hope that you'll continue your conversations and also let me know what you've come up with. And also, I want to say, if you're like, no, I am not into what you are saying right now, I also want to hear that. Please feel free to come up. Tell me what your concerns are. I think a lot of this is a process. And even if it's incremental, and on Friday we're doing a workshop, Dr. Carson and I, that will talk about incremental change, because this takes time to socialize within your organizations as well. And a lot of these things were put in place out of fear, but also out of a desire to help animals. So unpacking all of this, it is a process and a journey. But I think ultimately, people love their pets, right? And they want a place where they can find a companion. And what do we know? Most people, 2/3 of folks in this country have pets. They spend a lot of money on them, and they're not always getting them from us. So we have a tremendous opportunity that can really start with our own organization. And so I just invite you to that, and I appreciate you listening and keeping an open mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison. I love anytime someone frames the sort of frustrations and challenges and head-banging moments that we all have as opportunities. So I think that's very much our a call that we have here during these sessions, is to think about those opportunities and what we can do about them.